I feel like nowadays the horror game industry is really at a creative low right now. All that we've been getting from big studios is remakes of their classics and sequels that don't understand what made the prior ones good. I'm looking at you, Silent Hill Ascension. What I'm saying is, we haven't got really any original horror games, and by original, I don't mean groundbreaking concepts. The only game I can really think of that did that was Amnesia the Bunker. I've never played a game that handled survival horror in such a unique way like it did. But other than the Bunker, I can't really name any games in recent memory that scared me or were groundbreaking. Was it? What's this? Oh yeah, this guy. SIGNALIS is one of probably the best horror games I've played in recent memory. The only other real horror games out there that have left such an impact on me is probably Amnesia the Bunker and Iron Lung. And ironically, both of these are from a relatively small studio. Take note, AAA. But SIGNALIS is not only a great return to form of classic survival horror, but its story is genuinely amazing. And this video, I plan on trying to sort of analyze it. And I don't want to say explain, because to be honest, this is a story I don't think we'll ever really be able to explain. Think of it kind of like Petscop. Wow, I made a video about that. That's crazy. You should totally check it out, by the way. Petscop is a horrific story, but we'll never know all the answers or what happened or why strange things happened in that series. And I'd like to think that SIGNALIS is pretty much the same way. We have puzzle pieces, and the puzzle we can build is not complete, but we gotta live with it. So let's go ahead and get some things straightened out about the world of SIGNALIS. It's within our own world, just a different version. It can be assumed that, judging by the tarot cards and the planets and the things about them, this is simply the same world we live in as humans, just we gave planets different names. Some examples of this is how Venus is named Buyan. By the way, I'm pretty sure the devs are German, so I just want to warn you now, half these German names I'm going to completely fucking butcher. I deeply apologize. Earth is presumably Veneta, judging by the water and the fact that in a scene that we see, there were buildings and people that lived here. So it's presumed this was originally Earth before a really bad war. But we'll get into that. Mars was turned into Kittish. Why do they have to be German? This was Mars. Yeah, there's mentions about dust. Mars is pretty dusty. Rotfront is presumably an icy moon of Jupiter. These are the same planets within our solar system, just given different names, and people have been able to travel there because of something that humanity has been able to find and discover. However, we only know of 2 people that naturally have this ability. Bioresonance. Bioresonance is not really ever properly explained, but it can best be described as godlike powers. That's about the best way to put it. You can distort reality, mess with people's heads. You can create gravity. I mean, you can do basically anything with bioresonance as long as you know how to. And it's kind of assumed bioresonance might be what created humanity in the first place. The first person to have this power was a lady known as the Empress. Take note of her white hair. That's something a bit odd I want to point out. Well, we'll get into that in a bit. It's not known who the Empress married, but she presumably had a husband. The Empress, with her powers, was able to help humanity travel beyond Earth, or Veneta in this case. She was able to create induced gravity so people could live on the skies in Venus, because of Venus's very high pressure. Not to mention the clouds of acid, it made sense why people wanted to live in the skies. Now, all the labor to build these buildings on, planets not suitable for human life, that could take a chunk of the population out trying to build it. So, the Empress came up with a groundbreaking idea: creating robotic humans. It's presumed that all replicas, meaning if there's multiple of the same one, use the same basis, which involves copying somebody's neural patterns and presumably their face and kind of physical shape. Something to note is that all of them use the same hair color and have the same colored eyes. At least all the models, but the Alder model. Actually, a quick correction, all of them have the same colored hair and blue eyes. This just, I think, is something that all replicas have. Yeah, I'm adding this in post, by the way. The outer model itself is based on a man named Nikolai. Some of these models were given the ability of bioresonance from the people that made them. Aeon. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Like I said, I'm gonna be butchering like half of this game's fucking words. But with replicas, the Empress and her bioresonance, humanity was able to essentially conquer the stars. We still needed things like spacecrafts and food and water, obviously, but with the Empress's help, we were able to go beyond our planet's boundaries. We could essentially go out into space and just look at the stars. You could be out on Mars farming and feel the wind and the dust hit your skin. You could form memories. 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 Form memories. You could form memories. Form memories. Form memories. You could form memories. Carefully selected by Ion, exemplary citizens of the nation are permanently cryogenically preserved in neural archives, each becoming a neural pattern for a new replica model. To preserve the image of a replica as an incorruptible idea, the original gestalt is erased from records in public memory. During the production process, when experienced bioresonant technicians copy that neural pattern to a new unit, a majority of episodic memories are altered and suppressed. While the resulting replica maintains the skills and personality of the original gestalt, it will become incapable to recall specific events from life and the donor under normal circumstances. This ensures the replica performs its duties without distractions created by personal memories of the donor. However, even the best-maintained replica unit will eventually be exposed to stimuli that may cause gestalt memories to resurface. While units degraded in such a way pose no particular danger, like all units with persona degradation, they will eventually lose many of their advantages over gestalt workers. Because persona degradation is usually difficult to identify from the outside, bioresonance is used by command units to survey units under their command. Generally, it is recommended to swiftly decommission and replace replica units before their productivity decreases or they begin to show clear signs of individuality. When ammo is rationed, alternative ways of decommissioning may be deployed at the discretion of the local operational command. Eventually, the memories will resurface, and then the robot gets decommissioned and replaced again. To help with this, certain models have what are nicknamed fetish objects, and no, that does not mean all of them have vibrator, but instead things that calm them down and that can help them relax and forget these memories. One of my favorites is the, what are they called again? The Minos. These hulking robots that are meant to dig into the Earth or other planets and are just these giant behemoths. They're relaxed via stuffed cat dolls. Aura units, which typically work in the vents, are calmed down by having them near flowers or trees. We even see one using UV lights inside of the vents in order to grow a tree to try to calm down while reading info talking about how they could be easily replaced, how all their memories are from one person and every single other Aura unit is that same person. Yeah, I don't know if that tree is going to help you calm down from that, but I don't know about Colibri units, because of their bioresonance, can talk to each other via telepathy. However, this telepathy can mess with their neural patterns and create what the notes about them describe a emotional feedback loop. Basically, if one of them is, say, sad, and then this feedback loop begins, they'll become depressed, and thus must be decommissioned. Basically, whoever made this model didn't fucking know what they were doing. In the game, I should have mentioned this fucking when I started talking about replicas, people who are actually human are called gestalts. Replicas, or robots, are called replicas. More often than not, they work together. Life was pretty okay for a good while, but eventually, a group of people wanted to break away from the Empire's control, and this little rebel became a giant group, and they formed the nation, and that's where things really start to fall apart. The nation was started by the Great Revolutionary and her daughter. Their goal was to completely get rid of the Empire and destroy it, which meant violence. If there's anything our own history has taught us, war is not a pretty thing. And the nation, when you really look at it, kind of fucked themselves. It's not known when, but sometime after the Empress's death, It's presumed that that's when they started to attack. It's also hinted at that a person of the nation did kill the Empress, and that's what kickstarted the war in the first place. They were able to colonize Rotfront. Lang, which I forgot to mention that planet. Lang is the primary location of Signalis, and where all of the game presumably takes place on. The idea of reality starts to break away near the end. And before we go any further, we gotta describe how the nation acts. We don't really know how the Empire works, because this is Lang. The nation lives on Lang. We don't know what the Empire does. But they are very, very observant and restrictive on what people can do. They are about war and nothing but war. Their school teaches nothing but war and tactics and how to handle ammunition. Their replicas are designed for security and to spread propaganda. People are basically required to serve military service there. It is by all means a horrid state of living for its people. Because of the condition they live in, they very often have to ration food and ammo, and have this rule of 6 that you can only really carry 6 things on you. Carrying any more would just mess with space. They're about war and nothing but war. And one of the most brutal wars the nation most likely went through was on Earth itself. The Vendetta War was a bloody battle, and many lives were lost. But there are 2 characters, very important characters, that may not seem important, but they are. Lilith Ito and Aliyah Sino. I'm sorry if I butchered those surnames, I deeply apologize. They were lucky enough to say that they were a veteran and not a victim of the war, and Lilith ended up getting an injured right eye. It's presumed that Veneta was pretty much nuked into oblivion, with sea levels somehow rising beyond cities. Eventually, at some point, a replica model was designed, Elster. It was pretty much meant to serve as a sort of pilot partner, and could also, if need be capable of combat, but also be able to spend time doing nothing. Well, soldiers often have to find a way to kill time and usually do nothing, and soldiers are trained in combat. So Lilith became the basis for the Elster model. A very, very large hint at this is when Elster gets an injured right eye. If you look at the same shot of Lilith with an injured right eye, it's practically the same image. Not to mention, Elster seems to have no problem reloading a gun and handling ammunition. Give a Yola gun, they'll probably fucking panic. But anyway, they're pretty much designed to be a pilot's co-pilot. They can handle maintenance and not have to worry about severe injuries, because, they're a robot. However, much like all other replicas, there were things that could remind them of their human past. War movies, to be particular, art, and music. They're also heavily advised to not at all befriend an Elster unit. Now, as for Alina, okay, this is where things are going to get a little bit complicated. Now, we're going to jump ships here for a second and talk about a completely other character. I promise these 2 will return, however, do not worry. Now, we're going to talk about one of the bigger major characters of this story, possibly even, if you look at it, an antagonist of the story, Ariane. Ariane lived with her mother in a radio tower. She was able to express herself freely here due to it being far from the nation's grasp. It was out on the planet Lang, and while boring, it's presumably a peaceful life that she had there. However, sadly, she wouldn't be able to live here for long, as her aunt decided to contact the nation and wanted her to become part of the rest of the nation. However, as we've pretty much established, the nation is about war, not creativity. While there, she was very heavily bullied, and was treated very terribly, and was even physically assaulted by bullies, presumably. But while there, she did luckily make 2 friends who cared for her and liked her interests. Isolde, or Issa, I'm just gonna say Issa because it's easier to say, and her sister Erica became great friends with Ariane, and they liked her interests and were glad to have her as a friend. Something interesting to note about these sisters is that they shared the last name with Lilith, Ito, meaning that they are related to her. It's never explained if it's because they're cousins, siblings. Some people even theorize that perhaps Lilith is their mother, but we just know that they are related via bloodline. The Ito family had a bookstore where they would sell books. However, a good chunk of them were banned because, okay, it's gonna be a dumb comparison, but the nation in Signalis is just the fucking government from Fahrenheit 451. If you ain't read that book, basically any amount of creativity is censored in their world. They don't want people to think, they just want people to act. But Ariane was happy to have them as friends, but she still felt like she was being silenced here. She couldn't express her creativity here. She couldn't do what she wanted. She was basically having the creativity just beaten out of her. While it's not stated who in her family, somebody in her family owned a photo shop on Rotfront, and so she decided to work there. She saw a photo of Lilith and Alina, and it sparked her desire to go into the army. Not forcefully like the nation would do, but willingly. In her eyes, they seemed happy. Like they were happy to serve the nation, happy to be part of the army. And she thought maybe if she did it, she could feel freedom. However, she would only end up being a radio officer, and felt very disconnected the whole time. She wasn't feeling the joy that Lilith and Lena were feeling in their photo. Just a disconnection because everyone here has no creativity in them, because the nation has just beaten it out of everyone. But eventually, Aeon offered her a job on a spaceship called the Penrose, where she could travel through space to try to find other planets, and would have the assistance of an Ulster unit. And to her, this was a golden ticket. She could finally be free from the nation's grasps, and maybe while on the ship do some paintings, listen to music, and maybe the Ulster model could just go fuck off or something. And she decided to take it, to feel the freedom of no longer in the nation's grasp. However, this would sadly end in tragedy. But while she was there, she enjoyed her freedom, and began to take a liking to the Ulster unit. She thought that the way the Ulster unit reacted to her creativity was cute in a way. She decided not to read the manual about things you shouldn't do with Ulster units because she was so excited to just not be at the nation's grasp. And so she never read what you're not meant to do with an Ulster unit. Befriend them. She had the Ulster watch movies with her, dance to music, and before you know it, it went beyond just befriending, but a full-blown romantic relationship. The two of them were in love, and Ariane was happy to have somebody who they could care for, somebody who cared about them, and somebody who wasn't as stale as, say, the ship itself. Every day became the same, but the Ulster unit was always different, and always managed to cheer her up for just a bit. However, this Penrose program was not designed to have a happy ending if things don't go the way the nation planned. You see, if they couldn't find a location within a certain amount of time, the nation just did not care whatsoever. It was either you find a planet, or die in the cold emptiness of space in a rotting ship. They had a note advising that by the time that they assumed they were running out of supplies, tell Ariane to get Ulster to shoot her in the head or put Ariane into cryosleep so she wouldn't have to feel death. However, Ulster just couldn't kill Ariane. She had too much of a romantic love for her and cared for her too much to even think about causing harm. Eventually, the reactor in the ship began to slowly age, and radiation came out of it, slowly killing Ariane. Ariane still tried to spend these final days dancing and listening to music, being in love with Ulster, but the light was slowly fading out. Ariane tried to use the cryosleep, but because of the ship's age by this point, it was malfunctioning and no longer worked properly. It didn't necessarily put her to sleep, but it didn't necessarily keep her awake. She just existed in there and couldn't really do much. She kept begging Ulster to just end her misery. She had Ulster make a promise that, should the time come, she'll kill her. But because of how much Elster loved her, she just kept postponing it until she herself fell ill to the radiation. Ariane then sat in the cryopod, not awake, but not asleep. And this is just the beginning of this story. Now, because I feel like it, I'm going to go ahead and try to cover some stuff I didn't really go into detail about, and I kind of should have. If you just want to jump straight to the game's events and what happens after all the stuff I mentioned with the story, I have chapters linked below. Just jump to there. You don't gotta piss with this shit. If you already know what all the replicas are, or you just don't fucking care, feel free to skip. You ain't gonna hurt my feelings. We're gonna go ahead and tackle all of the replica models in alphabetical order. Adler models are designed to basically be administrators of buildings and locations. Usually there's about 1 or 2 per facility that's required. They're pretty much allowed to allow another major directing replica unit to do their job. Adler units themselves are not very good at working together with each other and are very susceptible to bioresonance manipulation by the major unit I'll not mention yet. They will form an emotional attachment to this said unit and to an almost romantical obsession. They get very easily bored and often require a lot of fetish objects to keep themselves stable. Our units are basically just your average maintenance repair and are pretty much used to replace modern human engineers. However, they're very emotionless and hold very big grudges. And if they get very stressed out, they'll just hide in the vents. They're often calmed down with plants. Yules pretty much serve as cooks or nurses or any other simple job that's required. The original person that they were based on was a ballet dancer, and so often music helps calm them down. They're also very social with other Yule units. Now that major unit I was hiding when I was talking about Adler is called the Falki, and is probably the most scary. They have extreme bioresonance abilities and are often used to watch over other replicas that use bioresonance. These said other units that use bioresonance are often called protectors and serve as security. Speaking of protectors, the Colibri, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, are security or protector replicas that can use bioresonance to communicate and increase squad cohesion. As I mentioned earlier though, they have these feedback loops that can mess with their brains and cause them to become decommissioned. The constant memories and knowledge that they all put into their little hive mind, however, can often act as a safety net of sorts. We've already touched on the Elster unit, so we'll just skip that one. The Mina units are heavy equipped miners that are like 9 feet tall. They have a human face just for the sole purpose of communication, and so human workers don't feel fucking disturbed. If it weren't for that, it'd probably just be a metal endoskeleton. As I mentioned earlier, ironically enough, these bulky behemoths' fetish object is stuffed dolls. Although never seen in a game, there is a combat variant of them called the Schnapper. I believe I'm pronouncing that wrong because it's German. They're pretty much the same thing as a Mina, but designed for combat instead of mining and demolition. Stars are basically more, I guess you could say, the SWAT, kinda sorta. They'll often interrogate people, and these interrogations can often become very bad, such as not allowing people to eat for 3 days. Apparently, them using military weapons is their fetish object. What? I guess the gun range exists for a reason. Storks are essentially, I guess you'd say, the captain of a star group, purposely being taller so they can get a higher advantage on things and be able to see things better and help coordinate better. They are very tall, like 7 foot tall. There's also a unit called a Kranich, which I could not get any fucking info about. And fun fact, pretty much every enemy you fight is a version of these replicas that have been distorted via the unknown sickness that is occurring. But we'll get into that when we talk about the game's events. Don't worry about it. Next up is just bioresonance itself. It is very complex and not very understood. It's presumed bioresonance is rare in people, and it's allegedly, I'm kind of with some theorizing here, there's only 2 people in existence that have been able to use it to a godlike ability. being the Empress and Ariane, but we'll get into Ariane's powers in a bit. Don't worry about it. And bioresonance itself is presumably what possibly created humanity in the first place. It can apparently distort reality, and we really see this in the Nowhere section, where we basically see locations from before completely twisted and distorted with flesh all around them. The flesh itself, I really don't know, I'm gonna be honest with you. I presume, in a way, the flesh represents reality in its rawest form. I know how fucking dumb that sounds, but I like to think the flesh is essentially reality in its physical form, if that makes sense. Or it could just be bioresonance fucking with shit. I don't know. The main location of the game, the S23 Sierpinski, I believe that's how you pronounce it. I don't know. I'm probably butchering it to high fucking hell. It's a very big location full of lots of many areas, mainly being a school, an old medical ward, a better medical ward, a place for people to work and live, a place for the protectors to live, and giant mining operations that can go on down there. We ourselves explore here, and near the end, end up exploring the Rotfront metro station area, I believe. We explore part of Rotfront in the 3rd chapter, basically. Anyway, now with that boring bit of info out the way, let's talk about the actual events of the game, and I'll try my best to explain what I think is going on. Because a thing with Signalis is a lot of it is up to interpretation, and I just really don't agree with a lot of people's interpretations. But anyway, let's delve into this pit. It's very deep. Signalis begins with Elster waking up in the Penrose. As we can tell from a computer monitor, this is the same one that Ariane was also in. Upon leaving, we see that the ship has now crashed in some snowy wasteland, and I have a partial theory about this place that's not going to make a lot of sense, but I'll go ahead and say it. I think that this sequence is a dream about something that really happened to the Penrose. I think, personally, and I'll elaborate more as we go on with stuff like the Nowhere, that bioresonance is able to transport Elster to these strange places. But in this case, it's a dream. She's dreaming about the Penrose and Ariane, and that it crash-landed on this place. And I think it really did crash-land on a snowy planet. But this is just a dream. Elster is not seeing reality. This is just fake and in her head. Something I really quickly want to note, but I promise will come important later, is the photo of Ariane. And I feel like this will come in very important later, but this photo, I think, is essentially a way of telling Elster through her dreams, come rescue me. Eventually, we cut to Elster in the Sierpinski facility, looking for not Ariane this time, but instead Alina. And so we can presume that Elster is now for some reason looking for Alina. Now, at first, you could assume that this is perhaps the Gestalt memories or Lilith memories affecting Elster. But I have a very wild theory here. I think that this is a real photo of Alina, and that what is happening is Ariane is using Lilith's memories, which are within Elster, to make Elster look for Alina, but in turn, find Ariane. I know, a lot of names I just said at once. Too long, didn't read. Ariane is being a bitch and making Elster think that she's Alina. As we go through, we meet one of the Ito sisters, Issa. Issa is looking for her sister, Erica. Issa states that she's looking for Erica and wishes Elster well on her journey to find Alina. We go through and see that the entire rest of the robots, or replicas, have been distorted into these zombie-like creatures. Now, I think I can confidently state how they became zombified like this in the first place. As we can read in the Folky unit's diaries, they had dreams about a girl with white hair. And what I presume is by corrupting the Folky unit's memories, it gave her this illness, because it stated the first person who ever got this illness that made them into zombies was the Folky unit. And well, she has bioresonance. Bioresonance connects to the other robots. And so thus, I think through bioresonance brainwave shit, the virus spreaded to the replicas. As to how it got to gestalts, it was possibly the same way as well, bioresonance as well. It's not explicitly stated humans aren't affected by it as well, so it's very confident to state the bioresonance also affected humans, but just flat out killed them, not made them these zombies. Because of the Folky having Ariane invade her dreams, she got a disease, it went to the other replicas, and now all the replicas are sick with this illness. Oddly enough, the Adler unit seems to be fine. He's perhaps avoided the virus. Maybe Folky felt nice and didn't spread her bioresonance to him. Now, before I get too deep into these theories, let's talk back to our journey through Sierpinski. Elster keeps going until she meets Adler, who says that he does know Alina, but when trying to ask him for help, he shoves us down an elevator shaft like a fucking cuck. And then what really reveals a dark thing about this game happens. We wake up and see corpses of Elster units blocked our fall. And here's the worst part. That's the top of the pile. There are even more beneath it, to the point where the elevator no longer works just from the weight of the corpses on top of it. Meaning Adler has pushed Elster down this elevator shaft God knows how many times. But I don't think it's the same Elster. What I think, and this is really gonna probably split some people apart here. We are not the same Elster that Ariane had on her ship. But instead, I think Ariane has been affecting multiple other Elster units that are completely separate from the one that she had with her, and making them go on this journey. It's not known really how she probably drives them here. Perhaps that dream in the beginning is what drives them here. Maybe in our case it's because we have that photo. Maybe through some bioresonance bullshit, she creates the photograph and then Elsters find it, and then go to Sierpinski to find Ariane. Well, Alina, but it's technically Ariane at this case. And I'm gonna go ahead and try to get Ariane out of the way now. I said I'd save her for later. Well, now it's later, so... We read diaries from Ariane, and in her diaries she writes about an Elster unit. And I think that this might be Ariane spreading bioresonance to Alina. As we can see with Adler's diary, the bioresonance affects people's memories greatly. In Adler's diary, he thinks he's reliving the same day over and over and over again and writes the same date over and over and over again. But with Alina, instead of I forgot, she I remember, or fake memories to be specific, of an Elster unit that she remembers as a friend. Now, this leads to a question. Why would Ariane target Alina? And better yet, why would she use Alina to trick the Elster units? You can answer that, but just let me speak. It's stated that Alina looked a lot like Ariane, and Ariane seeing Alina in this photo made her think maybe she could be like her and be happy because they look so similar minus hair color. And oddly enough, Alina, when we see her, looks horrible. So, as fucked as it's gonna sound, I think Ariane, out of jealousy, gave Alina the same sickness the others had. And she might be dead because she looks so damn sick. And ironically enough, just like Ariane, she's covered in bandages when we see her. And so I assume that she gave Alina a disease similar to radiation poisoning, like what Ariane experienced on the Penrose, and Alina slowly fell ill and most likely died because of it. Alina herself, presumably, according to these diaries, spent the rest of her life working in the mines in Sierpinski. It's not known why she went here, if it was a choice. We just know that she spent pretty much the rest of her time in the mines working. So anyway, back to the horrid discovery of the dead Elsters. I think Adler is trying to stop every Elster that comes here from reaching Ariane, or in other terms, reaching the Red Gate. The only person that's got there before is the Folky unit, and funny enough, she's the one that got back and then proceeded to give everybody the illness. I think that's probably why Adler has written the same day over and over. History feels like it's repeating itself because he's constantly having to shove Elster down the damn elevator. Eventually, we keep going, and we see that Issa and Adler are having a bit of a confrontation. And then Issa stabs him in the eye. Don't worry, the two of them will come back. Unfortunately, eventually we get into the mines, just where Issa and Adler had their fight, and end up in the Nowhere. The Nowhere is by far the creepiest chapter of the game, in my opinion, maybe minus the final one with some of its segments. But it's like it's pure Silent Hill horror with the rusty walls and everything. And we also see that Issa managed to get here and is fighting the Chimera, as it's called in the game files. We can either, if we want to, get Issa back up or not. I don't believe it has any real effect on the gameplay in particular. I think it just means you get the rifle. And eventually, we find ourselves at the Red Gate with Adler there too. He states no one's ever gone past it, and he's too scared himself to go through the Red Gate. Elster doesn't care and does, and we see the Penrose. Now, this is where I'm going to do a little bit of theorizing here, and this is also probably where people are going to disagree with me again. I think the entirety of Nowhere and the Red Gate doesn't really exist, but our characters exist within it. Let me explain. A good example I could think of to summarize what I think about the Nowhere is the Labyrinth section of Silent Hill 2. You're trying to get from the Historical Society to the dock. That's your goal at that point in the game. You go through the Historical Society and go through a comically large staircase, a abandoned underground prison with somehow still working lights in some locations, and then you end up in interiors that look like apartments, and you can tell reality is just fucked off. And you get out of the labyrinth, you move 20 feet. You weren't really in the Historical Society. And a good way to summarize it, here's Elster. Here's the Penrose. Now, we need a floor for them to get there. Now, sadly, it don't exist. But Ariane, through using bioresonance, can create the Nowhere and the Red Gate to help transport her to the Penrose. Basically, the Nowhere and the Red Gate don't actually exist, but they're used to transport Elster to the Penrose. Because as we see after she fails to open it, everything's snowy. Just like where the Penrose most likely landed. So after Elster becomes crippled, we see that Ariane is sadly not here. It turns out this must have been perhaps another dream created by Ariane or something to trick us, to keep us going, to make us keep our promise. Elster decides she wants to keep Ariane alive. And presumably through that dream sequence or flashback sequence, I believe that's what really makes Elster go after Ariane. And something real quick I want to state that reinforces the idea that it's just multiple Elsters trying to get to Ariane is that while we're walking to the Red Gate, there's tons of dead Elsters, meaning they didn't survive long enough to get to the Penrose. But we're determined. We are the one that will keep our promise. We will be the Elster unit that gets to Ariane and keeps our promise. Eventually, Elster acquires an arm and a chest plate from another dead Elster, and like I stated, I think that this version of the Penrose does not exist. I think this version is a dream, and it's simply just to keep Elster going. Ariane is by all means making Elster go through a fucking trial to reach her. Eventually, through the power of bioresonance bullshit, we end up on Serprinski, and then a rot front fucking living area. Rot front being where Ariane spent most of her life. While there, we meet Issa again, and Issa states that she couldn't find her sister, and we learn that Issa and Erica have apparently been dead this whole time, or at least Erica at the least. We see that Issa too has also begun to succumb to the illness, and just like what happens with most Gestalts with the illness, she succumbs and dies. Now, I'm going to explain how Issa got here in the first place, and I think it's very similar to what happened to Elster. Elster was led here by a photo of Alina, but in reality, Ariane wanted Elster to find her, Ariane. I think with Issa, Ariane made Issa think she's looking for Erica, because Ariane wanted Issa to find her. But instead, Issa just kept searching for her sister, and she ended up never finding her and dying of an illness. I think Ariane was using Issa similar to Elster as a way to get her killed and have the promise fulfilled, even if it's not from Elster. We keep going, solve some weird-ass puzzles, and once again, through some bioresonance bullshit, we end up in Ariane's home. Eventually, we get out and find diaries from Falky, stating she's had dreams where she's basically in Elster's place of moments when Ariane and Elster would have fun. Falky talks about dancing to music, watching war movies, watching painting. And in reality, these are Elster's memories into Falky. And I think, much like with Issa and Elster, Ariane thought maybe Falky could save her. But instead, she ended up making Falky the catalyst of the illness, and thus pretty much killed everyone on Saprinsky. Falky does not want us to get to Ariane because, in her mind, Ariane is her girlfriend instead. So we're forced to kill Falky through stabbing her with these spears that she has. Presumably through bioresonance, she transports us across multiple places. It can be argued if it's Ariane doing this, Falky, or hell, maybe even both. But eventually Elster wins and finally gets to the Red Gate. But Adler is still determined not to let this happen, and by this point in the story, the sickness has finally gotten to him, and he's nothing but just flesh. In a last-ditch effort, he stabs Elster in the eye, injuring her very severely, but with her handgun, she shoots him and keeps walking off. Adler saying that she's doomed us all, because he doesn't know what lies beyond the Red Gate, but we do. To Adler, the Red Gate is what caused the illness. The Red Gate is what made the commander die. To him, the Red Gate is where the end of the world is. But in reality, it's just the gateway to Ariane. Eventually, Elster gets inside, this time not ripping her fucking arm off, and depending on your choices, you will acquire one of 3 endings. There's a 4th one, but we're not going to talk about that one. You either fulfill your promise and end Ariane's suffering, and Elster eventually succumbs to her injuries. Elster refuses to do it and just can't take it. She doesn't kill her, she walks out the ship, and suddenly everything's in water. It's not at all what was outside once before, and she succumbs to her wounds again. And in the next one, Ariane doesn't even know who Elster is. She doesn't recognize her. She doesn't even know why you're talking to her, basically. And Elster just asks that she can spend her dying moments with Ariane as she slowly bleeds out. And Ariane is still here, forced to suffer. In 2 of the 3 endings, Ariane still suffers, and presumably another Elster unit will be sent again to try to complete this fucking horrid trial. But in the promise ending, Ariane's suffering is laid to rest, and the cycle never begins again. We ended it. Ariane's free. Okay, then there's the one ending. This one, I don't know what to describe it as. By gathering 3 keys by playing the most random radio signal numbers possible, you can unlock an ending where you end up with Ariane on the ship, still destroyed, but the 2 of you dancing. And we see a shrine full of multiple dead Elsters of various outfits. I'm gonna be honest, I really don't know what this ending could mean. I'm gonna be really honest with you here. I think, in a way, Elster and Ariane are in this dream state of being together, but in reality, Ariane's still suffering. Or a way you could maybe look at it is she finally was able to leave the mortal realm, and now Elster and her in the fucking afterlife or something are now dancing in the rotted Penrose. Like I said, I really don't know what this ending could mean. I really don't know. Okay, that was a lot of fucking info, so let me say it in a too long didn't watch tone. Ariane is stuck in the Penrose. With the power of bioresonance, she can manipulate reality, and through this, tries to send dreams to replicas to rescue her and put her out of her misery. She tries it with Issa by convincing Issa that Erica is somewhere in Saprinsky and hopes that Issa will eventually find her. However, Issa sadly succumbs to the illness. Said illness was created when Ariane gave Falky dreams and made Falky think she's Elster. These dreams seem to have corrupted her bioresonance, put her into a coma-like state, and thus through bioresonance brainwave bullshit, basically infected everyone in Saprinsky, killing the humans, and as we see with Issa, by killing, I mean literally melting them, and with the replicas turning them into the zombies that we have to fight. And finally, in a last-ditch effort, Ariane took Elster about 50,000 times, and had multiple Elster units try to rescue her. However, they all ended up failing, either through getting killed, dying on their journey to the Red Gate, or Adler pushing them down the elevator shaft. Adler himself is convinced that time is repeating, probably through bioresonance driving him insane, and also having to kill Elster so many times, and is very, very worried that he'll get sick. And that's why he doesn't want Elster to go through the Red Gate. Because to him, when the commander, or Falky, went through the Red Gate, the fucking entirety of Saprinsky died. So if Elster goes through there, what if it gets out of Saprinsky? What if humanity itself is doomed by this illness because Elster wants to go through the Red Gate? So that's why Adler tries to stop it. And I think that scene where Adler's hunting down Issa and says, "I've done this many times before," he doesn't mean with Issa in particular. He means with Lester units. He's killed them so many times that he just pretty much knows any hiding spot, minus the one Issa chooses. And depending on your ending, Elster either finally ends this cycle of people being sent here to rescue Ariane, or the cycle continues, and thus Ariane must send presumably another Elster unit to come rescue her. The way that Ariane makes these said Elster units hunt her is by that dream sequence in the intro. As it's heavily hinted, Lilith was the basis for the Lester model. So by having a picture of Elena, the Lilith gestalt memories within the Elster units kick back on, so thus the Elster units go looking for Elena because the Lilith memories remind them that's your girlfriend. But in reality, it's actually Ariane that's being hunted down. And I presume in the flashbacks we see, because of how close we get to actually rescuing Ariane, she reminds us through that dream of them dancing and reminding us through that, hey, you're looking for me, not Elena. And thus, Elster stays determined, gets themselves a new arm, a bulletproof vest, and finally tries to finish the promise. Now, not everyone's gonna believe my theories, and that's fine. Because I think the beauty of games like Signalis, Inside, Lost in Vivo, and why they're still talked about even today, is because of just how cryptic and mysterious the endings and stories are. We won't really understand what's going on in Lost in Vivo. I mean, there's bits about government conspiracy, your mind. There seems to be other characters' personal hells that we're going through. Inside's world seems to have been fucked over by horrible events, but it could be argued if maybe humanity is what caused this. And maybe humanity fucked themselves, but then the shockwave that we see, did humanity create that, or was that a natural disaster? And with Signalis, we won't really know for as long as we live what's really going on, and unless the developers explicitly state what's going on, we'll never know. And while other Signalis theories I hear involve looping time and hell and the afterlife, I think Signalis in reality is just a story about somebody in pain trying to get their lover to save them. Ariane is in a state of living and dying at the same time because of the broken cryopod. No one wants to live in the conditions that she is living in, ever. Ariane using bioresonance to make replicas think that you are Elster, you're my girlfriend, come rescue me. Or with Issa, hey, I'm your friend, come rescue me. And thus spreading a disease from her horrid thoughts. And a fun fact, if you didn't know this, all the symptoms that the zombies have are the same symptoms of radiation poisoning. The same thing Ariane was going through. Ariane uses her bioresonance to literally take people through flesh, this alternate reality called the nowhere, just to transport them closer to her, and half of them still fail. Only in the promise ending was it ever fully done. In every other ending, with possibly the exception of the artifact ending, the cycle continued again. And a sort of horror and cosmic horror idea is the idea that in the other endings that isn't the promise ending, Elster is just one of God knows how many that have failed to get to Ariane. And Ariane, honestly, it could be argued she's the villain for her actions. If she's the one that basically invented the illness, she literally made people go through radiation poisoning. She's the one manipulating people and caused Issa to get the illness herself by trying to find her sister only to realize her sister's dead. She manipulates the Lilith memories buried within Elster units to make them find Alina, when in reality she just wants them to find her. But you can also argue she's just suffering and wants to have this end. And that, to me, is the beauty of games like Signalis, is that you argue what's really good here, what's really bad, who's particularly the villain. I love games where there's no clear black or white. It's just pure gray. And by gray, I don't mean nobody's bad, nobody's good. There can still be a very clear villain, or your character is the villain, but you can understand why they did what they did and can argue that in their mind it was the right thing. Silent Hill 2, not to spoil it, but its ending makes you look at James as a character of gray. His ultimate goals that he did were understandable in his current headspace at the time, but it was still a fucked up thing. There are lots of horror classics out there. Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Amnesia, Soma, Little Nightmares, and I think Signalis will be on that list.